Property number 2 in the market Place Caistor, presented by Alan Dennis, Director of Caistor and District Community Trust and Director of Caistor Heritage Trust. Our story starts when in 1681 a fire destroyed many of the town properties. At this time the town was centred within the Roman walls. This was in the area of the church, the grammar school, the vicarage and the beast market. After this, the main town began to develop around what we now know as the marketplace, probably starting with Caistor House. There was already the Sessions House. In this talk, we are particularly considering the development of what is now known as Number 2 Marketplace. We will be following the people who owned, lived and worked in the building. I hope when we reach the distant past, you will share your photographs and memories with us. 2 Marketplace has an open ground floor plan with very little historic interest internally, though it retains significant structural beams. There is an area to the rear that, whilst heavily altered, retains an area containing a 19th century range and joinery. Access to the upper stories is maintained by an original staircase with turned balustrading, with the first and second floor both retaining 3 over 3 vertical sliding sash windows, the first floor also retaining its integral shutters. On the upper stories, the chimney breasts with later fireplaces remain, as well as plasterwork and a number of joinery features, including built-in cupboards and coat hooks. The granary building is the other substantial property on the site. It appears to show a structure of early 18th century date. It contains a cellar and an early hoist. In 1765, Walter Welsby, a baker, married Mary Oliver in Caistor. Their children were baptised between 1765 and 1769, and they were Anne, Martha, Molly and Oliver. Number 29 Marketplace was a baker's. Did Walter start his career here, as the building was originally designed as a baker's shop? Number 2 and Number 1 Marketplace were owned by Walter Welsby in 1782. We know from the freeholders list that Walter was a Caistor draper, maltster and grocer in 1774 and 1800. Also between 1790 and 1798 he was a grazier. He rented land from John Loft at Market Stainton and Great Sturton. He was said to be a farmer at Market Stainton between 1802 and 1805. Did he take over his father's farm after his father's death? Walter's burial took place at Market Stainton in 1806 at the age of 77. In 1806 also, Walter's son, Oliver, was selling Number 1 and Number 2 Marketplace. Lord William Beauclerk had bought the property. The story of Lord William Beauclerk is worth considering here. Those who know Caistor will be aware of Beauclerk House on South Street. William was also instrumental in some restoration work on the parish church in the early 19th century. Now Lord William married Charlotte Thirlwell of Redbourne. Charlotte's mother was the daughter of Sir John Nelthorpe, the 5th Baron of Scorby Hall. Charlotte died in 1797, and in 1799 William remarried. His new wife was Maria Janetta Nelthorpe. The Nelthorpe family can be traced back to Scorby Hall. Sir Henry Nelthorpe, 5th Baron, who died in 1746, is known to have purchased property in Caistor. This would be following the fire, so he may well have been involved in the development in the building of 2 to 4 Marketplace and the surrounding area. Sir John VI, Baronet of Scorby Hall, is also known to have invested in properties in Lincolnshire. Research is ongoing to see if it is possible to trace the actual properties in Caistor that the 5th and 6th Baronets invested in. The Bell family in Caistor and district go back to at least 1590. For this talk we are particularly interested in Joseph and, I believe, his father John. In 1775 and 1776, John Bell is on the list of freeholders as a grocer, but between 1777 and 1782 as a yeoman. It is possible, but I have found no evidence, that John's grocery business was based in No. 2, the Marketplace. In February 1779, Joseph Bell is a mercer and marries Frances Tess of North Kelsey. They have children: Dixon, who becomes a Caistor tradesman; Anna, who died at 6 months; Francis, who died at the age of about 3 years; Mary, Elizabeth, and John. Between 1781 and 1798, Joseph appointed a number of apprentices, including James Fagan. Joseph was very much involved in the community, being on the freeholders and jurors list, and attending a number of public meetings in the town. He subscribed as much as 5 guineas to the Voluntary Defence Fund in 1798, and the same towards the North Lincolnshire Legion in 1803. In October 1792 he attended a meeting about an intended canal between Caistor and the River Ancombe. The following year there is a meeting of hat, gloves and perfumery retailers at the George Inn to agree to pay the stamp duty imposed on those items. Then, in 1794, Joseph attended a Weights and Measures meeting in support of the selling of corn at a measure equal to the Winchester bushel, and of selling wool at 28 shillings and locked at £14 to the stone. But by 1806, Joseph is bankrupt. There is a 2-day sale of his effects. He had lived well, surrounded by middle-class comforts and amenities. Joseph Bell was in partnership for a time with Joseph Swan, the son of Robert Swan. Robert married Elizabeth in Caistor in 1764. As Robert was a mercer, grocer and draper, I guess he may have traded from No. 2 Marketplace for a time. Joseph was born in 1777 to parents Robert from Northumberland and Elizabeth Trout. They had 7 children altogether. Robert and Elizabeth, with some of the children, emigrated to the United States. They are recorded as living in the state of Carolina. I guess their son Joseph stayed on to work in the shop. In 1818, there is a farmer at Hunden with the name of J. H. Swan. Is this our Joseph? Joseph Swan by 1841 is living on independent means with the Chant family in the Marketplace. He died at Caistor in 1848, aged 72. In 1806, the land tax records suggest that Lord William Beauclerk had bought the property, and the tenant was Redshaw Spring, a draper and grocer. However, Redshaw too went bankrupt in 1810, though he was still at No. 2 Marketplace in 1813. It has been difficult to find much out about him. He seems to have come from the Brig area and was married to Elizabeth Dunn at Rawby in 1803. Redshaw did appoint 2 apprentices, one in 1805 and the other in 1806. He was a subscriber to the Association for the Prosecution of All Kind of Felons between 1810 and 1812. The most interesting story about Redshaw was from 1805. Sarah Nutt, a spinster from Caistor, stole a pair of leather shoes from the shop. Sarah was sentenced to 1 month's solitary confinement at the Bridewell. I have been unable to trace neither the specific Maris or Toll families. The Toll family seemed to be from the Boston area. One of the family changed his name to Arthur Lucan, and with his wife toured worldwide, made films, and broadcast on the radio as Old Mother Riley and Kitty.
Healthy work, but there's too much of it. The farmer wants me to work 25 hours a day.
Don't be silly, 25 hours. There's only 24 hours in a day.
Ah, but he expects me to get up an hour before daybreak.
The Maris name is well known in the area, but I cannot make the connection. By the end of the 19th century, the Toll family have a building company in Chapel Street. In 1815, the tenants of number 2 were Maris and Toll, but in 1819, the business was dissolved. The only tenant in 1860 was Thomas Toll. In 1820, Lord William Beauclerk became the Duke of St Albans, and in 1822, Thomas Toll paid him £21 twice a year as rent. This ended before 1825, for Mr Toll bought the property off the Duke. In 1826, he was said to be a porter and wines and spirits merchant, a tallow chandler, and 4 years later, a linen and woolen draper. Thomas played a large part in the life of the town, and was a church warden at least 3 times, and also was an overseer and a guardian at the hospital. He was a keen Methodist and politically a radical. He supported Sir Colin Early Smith, who was not popular among the local farmers, and an adversary of the Reverend George Watson, the vicar. Thomas retired in 1835, selling the property and business to Frederick Stubbs. In 1835, Frederick Stubbs was also, at the time, trading at Burley Marsh and Ingomells, but had put these shops up to let. He states that they have turned over up to £4,000 in a year. That his intention in Caistor was to keep a good assortment of plain and fancy goods suitable for a respectable family trade, and plans to go to London, Manchester and other markets every 2 months to constantly renew stock in getting fancy goods of the newest description as they are produced. In December 1836, Frederick informs the gentlemen of Caistor and the neighbourhood that he has got an excellent stock of broad and narrow cloths, and from the extensive encouragement in the tailoring business, he has no doubt of continuing to give every satisfaction as regards style of cutting, fitting, workmanship, etc. He also advertises for sale Thomas of Boston horse medicine. His business was clearly wide-ranging, as he was an agent for the county fire office. A number of advertisements can be found for staff. Wanted immediately, a first-rate tailor as foreman, capable of cutting in the first style of fashion and have had considerable experience in London. Wanted immediately an assistant in the grocery and chandling business. None need apply who are not competent to take the management of the grocery and chandling in all their branches. Is an immediate want of a respectable and well-educated youth as an apprentice. The situation is comfortable and he will be treated as one of the family. The various valuations of his premises were much higher than many, even in the marketplace. For example, in 1837, the rateable value was £45. In 1841, living on the premises with him was his wife and 4 children, plus 8 other people employed by him. There were 2 draper journeymen, 2 male draper apprentice, 2 female milliners, and 2 female domestic servants. Frederick was a prominent citizen of Caistor and was a man with big ideas and plenty of ambition, who I believe overreached himself. He went bankrupt and was sold up in 1842. His assets were sold. There were raisins, currants, refined and raw sugar, teas, rice, upwards of 50 dozen of prime store candles, prime yellow soap, a quantity of salt, together with linen and woolen drapery, a variety of shawls and fancy goods, ribbons, gloves, hosiery, counterpanes, quilts, blankets. Also for sale is an old established shop with the extensive warehouse, outbuildings, and extended backwards to another street, being one of the principal thoroughfares, on which the premises, the drapery, grocery, and tallow chandling business has been carried on for upwards of 70 years. The shop is fitted up with all necessary fixtures. To the rear is a carriage house, stable, and a spacious range of warehouses, built over nearly the whole rear of the premises, in one of which is a crane for taking up heavy goods. In the yard is a well of excellent water with a pump. The cellars are capacious and dry, being entirely dug out of chalk rock. The dwelling house consists of a sitting room, a drawing room, and 4 commodious bedrooms in front, 3 bedrooms backward, and a kitchen and scullery. In 1842 there is a record of Maria Stubbs as a linen draper, but the business and property is sold to William Borman. 3 years later Frederick Stubbs died in Huddersfield, and by 1851 Maria is head of the household and a schoolmistress in Huddersfield. In 1842 the property is transferred to John Robinson and his trustees, led by William Borman. John is described in 1851 as a tailor, draper and grocer. He employed 6 men, but not all of them lived in. 2 of his daughters worked for him, as well as 2 living-in apprentices. All told, there were 14 people living in the house. When he needed new hands, being a keen Methodist, he always stated that Wesleyans were preferred. In the early summer of 1849, the following was published in the paper. The improvements in our marketplace will surprise those who have not yet visited the square within a month. The windows in the shop of Mr. Robinson are now composed of squares of very fine plate glass, and so large that Goliath might almost have seen his full figure in hostile position. There's also a new draper's shop near the Butter Market, which is to be occupied by Mr. Bellamy. The panes are equally as large as in the above-named shop. It was one of the main functions of these larger shops that they imported luxury and stylish goods, otherwise physically out of reach, for the benefit of the local gentry, farmers and fellow tradesmen. John also traded with Charles Colton, who was a wine merchant and had a premises where the present pizza takeaway is. In 1849, a newly married woman from Grasby stole goods from John Robinson's shop. They were described as turnovers to the value of 4 shillings and 6pence the half dozen. Mr. Robinson was told of the theft and apprehended the woman, who strongly denied the theft and resisted arrest. She was taken before the magistrate, who committed her for trial. Her friends paid the bail. John was an agriculturist as well as running the shop, as can be seen in 1854, when he had a hog stolen, which he kept in a field near to the workhouse. When Mr. Robinson left the business in 1864 to go farming, he rented the premises to Edward Small. In 1861 he was living at Waddingham and a farmer of 285 acres. John Robinson died in 1878. In 1851, Edward Small was a draper and grocer in the High Street, upon Humber. He was born at East Retford in 1822, and his first marriage was to Mary. By 1861 he was a draper and grocer in Caistor with his wife and 5 children. There was an assistant, an apprentice and a house servant. Edward was also an auctioneer. Again, he was a keen Wesleyan, temperance man, and in 1859 helped found a Band of Hope. In about 1863 he left Caistor. He had the post office at Barton-on-Humber. Edward also continued his auctioneer's business when he moved to Barton. In 1885 Mary, his first wife, died, and in 1889 he remarried to a lady called Emma. He remained in Barton until his death in 1905. William Short Lord was in Caistor from 1864 and was still in the marketplace nearly 50 years later. It was in his time that the shop was called the Central Stores. Like many of his predecessors, he was a Wesleyan. He was born at Binbrook in 1839. In 1871 there were 14 people living on the premises, 9 family members including mother, brother, mother-in-law, sister-in-law, nephew and aunt. There were 2 apprentice and 2 general servants. One of the employed was Alfred Stepnell, and he went on to have his own shop in Caistor. Mr. Lord eventually bought the premises from Mr. Robinson in 1878. In 1882 he had a mortgage of £800 and Miss Maris from the old vicarage held the mortgage. George Hattersley, when writing about the 1880s, tells us that next to Mr. Watson's was Mr. Lord, the draper and grocer, who did a good business in addition to which he did some farming. William was on the 1887 committee to celebrate Queen Victoria's 50th anniversary by building the town hall. 10 years later, he was vice-captain of Caistor Town Football Club. As one of the guardians of Caistor Hospital in 1903, he said that there was a lot said about the vagrancy question. He pointed out that the country was in a very bad state and that numbers of men could not get work, do as they would. There were more people out of work at Caistor this summer than ever, and they would not get work. The chairman replied, to go and try and employ a few vagrants and see whether they will work. In 1913, William lived at Springfield in Brig Road. His wife Christine died in 1909, and William himself died in 1918. The 1919 will says William Short Lord was an outfitter and grocer of Caistor, North Kelsey, Ulceby and Ouston Ferry. Plus he was a JP for the Lindsey Division of Lincolnshire. The will was proved at £3,299 gross. In 1911 Mr. Lord had retired and the shop was managed by a Mr. Archie Radford. In 1906 and 1910 Archibald Radford was a grocer in St. Thomas Road, Launceston, Somerset, but by 1911 he was manager of the Central Stores. Archie was born in Yeovil, Somerset in 1883. His wife was Julia, and she was baptised in 1887 at Scorby, Lincolnshire. In 1911 there were no children. Mentioned in the house at the time of the census was a draper traveller, an assistant in the grocery department, an assistant in the warehouse and with the horses, and an assistant in haberdashery, a milliner, and a general domestic servant. By 1914 he is back in Somerset as a grocer, but is enlisted in the North Staffordshire Regiment as a corporal. Moving on to 1939, he is at the same grocery shop in Somerset. In 1885 and 1886, John George Topless, who was born at Donington-on-Bain, had a draper's and grocer's business in Tetney. By 1891, John, at the age of 32, had a draper and grocer shop in Wainfleet, All Saints. Just after 1896, John and family had moved to Edgbaston. The 1901 census shows John had a shop and house at 197 to 201 Sherlock Street in Edgbaston. He did not own it, as it belonged to a Mr. Bates. By 1909, the family have a shop at 6 Queen Street, Market Raisin, and are living at the Limes. In 1928, John George Topless is on the Caistor electoral roll and is said to have a shop in the marketplace, but his abode was Market Raisin. The question must be, did he take the shop on from the time Mr. Radford left it in about 1915? Mabel Florence Talbot's parents were John George Topless and Ada Annie Topless, whose story we've just heard. In 1885 and 1886, John George Topless had a draper's and grocer's business in Tetney, where Mabel was born. When Mabel was 6, they were at Wainfleet, but within 5 years had moved to Edgbaston, where Mabel must have met her future husband. By 1909, the family have a shop at 6 Queen Street in Market Raisin. Mabel is assistant with the business, as is one of her brothers. Mabel married George Herbert Talbot on the 27th of March 1913. They had 2 daughters, Joan, who was born at Kings Norton, Warwickshire, in 1914, and Barbara, born at Aston, Birmingham, in 1917. No evidence has been found to answer what happened to Mabel's family between 1917 and 1935. Mabel was widowed by 1939. Her husband may have died in 1937. Mabel's father died on the 1st of May 1929, and it is assumed that Mabel Florence Talbot ran the Caistor shop from this time. That same year, Barbara, her daughter, was 12 years old. By 1935, the awnings at the front of the shop are printed with the name M.F. Talbot. At some time, although they worked at number 2, mother and daughter lived in Westgate House on Plough Hill. In 1929, there's a newspaper article which says, William Lynch, 54, labourer, pleaded guilty to breaking and entering the dwelling house of Mabel Florence Talbot at Caistor, with the intent to commit a felony, and was sent to prison for 12 months hard labour, there being many previous convictions. It's assumed that this was not at number 2, but at Westgate House, or wherever her house was at the time. In 1996, Barbara moved shop from number 2 Marketplace to number 8. Mabel died in July 1977, and Barbara 20 years later.
Now, Mrs. Mabel Florence Talbot, she must have taken over from Lord's. Well, in my book, it's 1930, she's in it, yeah. She had 2 daughters, one married and one didn't. Barbara, she stayed with her, but then she moved to the train set.
Yeah.
But the diagram at the bottom is how the shop front was.
Yeah.
The liney bits is the panes which was held together with these. This is the sort of patterns that was stuck over the window panes to keep the panes of glass in.
So they would just
That's
stick them across the windows?
Yes, to keep them in, keep the panes in. And that's the sort of thing that Mrs. Talbot sold, magazines like that, paperbacks. But the second to end one, there's some models. Now those are the sort of models that was in the window doing men's wear and ladies' wear. Picture frames, dress patterns, covers. They really was dangerous. And at one time somebody went and told her that if the wind blew it, you know, it would cause thingy. But as you went in the middle of, as you went in, there was a gate at the front to stop you going in there at night, and that was moved to one side. So you went in, and it was sort of a slight slant, and I seem to think there was black and white tiles, mosaic tiles. But they'll be covered in with concrete now, won't they? Because it'd be slanting. Well, there was wooden when I went in, except I think for the ladies' bit, and that could have been mosaic. But the left-hand side, as you went in, there was definitely wood, definitely. And the big counter. You went down this slant to the, I thought was 2 doors, yeah. And you went down, and on the right was the ladies and tablecloths, and on the left was men's stuff, and it was most of the men's stuff was on those frames I've shown you. Yeah, well, it's slanted down, and I'm sure there was black and white mosaic.
I can remember the shop next to the chemist was run by a lady called Mrs. Talbot. The Talbots' shop and house were on 3 floors, and the shop had pillars which appeared to be supporting the ceiling. I distinctly remember going into the back room and looking up to a large circular balcony. I never managed to get up there. Both Mrs. Talbot and her daughter Barbara dressed in a very Edwardian way, with lace high-collared blouses and rolled coiffured hairstyles. They sold wool and buttons, and they had a library on one side. Mum visited Mrs. Talbot's wool shop regularly. I remember being fascinated by her fingernails. They were always painted and immaculate. She always used to save wool for the customers when they bought any, so that if they needed extra, they'd be able to get the same dye batch and get a perfect colour match. She also wore very red lipstick. She later moved to the corner of the marketplace, next to Don Bontoff's sweet shop and opposite Bates and Mountain.
It is at this point we come to the part of the story where we hope you will contact us and share your memories of what the shops were like inside, the people who served you, the customers, stories about the accommodation and the people who lived there or visited. This can be written memories. We're willing to record your everyday memories. We would be pleased to copy any photographs. We know from the time of the spa shop that numbers 2 to 4 became one shop rather than 3 individual units. Thank you for watching and listening. The next talk will be about number 3, the marketplace.